When I was a kid, I played a lot of video games that shaped my tastes and preferences well into adulthood. One of those games from my childhood is a game called The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang, and we're going to talk about it today. A simple game about a kid vampire who needs to save his kingdom. A brief intro cutscene gives you some insight into what's going on. Essentially, there are three kingdoms, each with their own ruler, but one of the rulers, Von Hessler, goes bad and takes over the land and kidnaps the others. The journey begins just after this happens. The game starts off arriving on Fighter Island, after a brief scene where Camellia, the daughter of one of the three families, arrives to tell Spike what happened to their parents in the lands. Spike tells her that he wants to help, but he also doesn't want to lose his deposit on the training island, and she storms off to take care of things on her own, and Spike begins his training. Fighter Island is your first foray into the land where Spike is trained in the ways of the warrior by this guy, fairy person, named Clarence. The area does a good job of teaching you the basics of the game. He starts off by having you jump over logs, then has you break boulders, and I really like this section where the stone heads send you flying up into the air after jumping on a seesaw. This game's just full of weird things like this, and it's one of the things I really love about it so much. After learning how to use your hat toss in the next section, you get to do some river rafting to practice your timings. Then it's on to fighting the master himself, or rather, his magical staff. The fight's fairly straightforward. It basically just flies around and you hit it until you win. After you win, he gives you a card deck box and sends you off back to Batland. This box gives you the ability to use magical cards. This is a great tutorial area. It's weird, brief, and teaches you everything you need to know. There really isn't any exploration to be had here, but the linear path through this is at least interesting and varied. Now on to Batland. This place is the most nostalgic for me. It's where I remember spending most of my time, which is hilarious because the town is incredibly small, and the path to the castle is only 2 screens, with a few enemies and a few screens around the castle's front. You have a couple of different houses where you can talk to NPCs through their front door instead of, barging in like some heroes, and there's a couple of shops where you can buy some items such as cards from a kind of random card giving place, and you can also buy tomato cards and hats. Now the hats are pretty linear in how good they are. Pretty much if it's more expensive, it's a good idea just to get that hat. It mostly just changes the pattern in which they fly out. It doesn't really seem to change the damage, that as far as I can tell anyway. So just get the best hat you can and move on. I was actually somewhat surprised at how brief this area actually was, and you can never return to it after you leave, because my memory of it is so strong. I must have started over a lot and, did partial playthroughs, because I have a similar feeling for Clocktown and Majora's Mask. Once you get to the locked castle doors, you get a phone call, and you get to meet with your pet sea monster Sid, who is adorable, and he tells you that a monster stole the key to the door. So you have to go a couple screens to the right, grab it, it's straight to the point. This area has no exploration aside from the required areas that you have to go. And now, we're inside of the Castle Dracuman. Castle Dracuman is the first dungeon area and is also pretty straightforward. The deepest it goes in the way of puzzles is just needing to have you wander around until you find the keys or an NPC that'll help you get past certain doors and obstacles. For instance, there is a wall in the castle you can't get past, but if you go to the far west, there's this guy here, who proceeds to kick Spike so hard, he goes through several screens and smashes right through the wall. This is another one of those quirks I just adore about this game. I wouldn't have expected this to happen. The castle's pretty straightforward to navigate. The closest thing to a puzzle here is finding the few keys that are at the end of branching paths, and one key is being held by a giant spider in the rafters. The area is full of feline fighters and fire-breathing zombies. Neither of them will cause you too much trouble. Especially once you level up, the spiders in the rafters are no threat at all. They have you do no sort of puzzle besides kind of looking for keys, and that's just kind of going in one direction and then backtracking. For the other keys, it's just at the end of a long fork. So, one of the two things will happen. You'll go down the forked corridor, find a key, and then you'll turn around and go back, and you'll find the locked door and go through the door. But sometimes you find the door first, which means you have to go back and take the other fork to go get the key, and then go back to the door. Eventually, you find Spike's mom in the castle's dungeon, and she heals up Spike after a heartfelt message, and then you get to battle Felina. Felina's boss fight is mostly just her jumping around and swinging her baton at you and doing some cool acrobatic jumps. She's quite agile and can be tricky unless you are, a few levels higher than her. She even has a bit halfway through the fight where she levels up and restores her health and gets stronger, making the second half a bit harder. In that phase, she has a few more moves up her sleeve. I enjoyed the whole cutscene of her tricking you here, and she ends up locking Spike up and having to have Rudy come and save you. The best part is, after Felina tricks you, you end up getting broken out by Rudy, and then you get to destroy her with a one-liner quip of "Eat hat, cat." After that, Rudy tells you that Von Hessler isn't evil, which is his father, because Rudy is his son, and you decide to go and move on to the next area. Also, you heard that Camellia is sick, and you have to go help her because she did not make it to Von Hessler's castle. In fact, she's in Ratland. Up next is Ratland. This area isn't bad. It exists in a good spot in my mind. In the beginning of this area, falling boulders come down and crush up your car, and you have to make it to Ratland on your own. Something I found odd in this area is that there are branching paths that just lead to dead ends. There's no secrets going off of the main path, no chests, anything. The part I find strange is that you were even able to go to these places. Like, there's new areas that were created that are just empty screens. It makes me think that they didn't have time to add stuff, or they planned on doing more than they actually ended up being able to do. This game really could have benefited from chests, or could have even just had cards hidden about for you to find. Instead, there's really no new items or anything to find by looking around. On the positive note, you get to see some really cool enemy designs here. I really like these boxing glove cactus enemies here. I forgot they existed, but it brought back memories when I did see them, and I don't even care about their mechanics, I just love how these guys look. After you reach a certain point, you get ambushed by the Ratland guards, who don't know who you are at first, but once they do, they realize and take you to Camellia, who is sick inside of their cave. You learn that you need this special water from this desert area, and you need to go there, so that's where you go next. Running through the desert's actually really strange. There's a lot of these weird enemies, like these weird balloon guys you have to jump on, and it's pretty easy, but eventually you land on a balloon that can't carry you, and you get dumped into the desert somehow. And now we're in the Kalala Desert. Overall a good area. I like the designs of the enemies here. It's extremely noticeable the lack of exploration this game has though, as you can hold up on the D-pad and go all the way through the desert with no branching paths, all the way to Croc. It's almost like you can feel this game had more time in the beginning and then less as it goes, because each area after the first area seems to be shorter and more straightforward. After just a couple of screens, you run into Croc. I find it funny how Croc is literally standing about 2 screens into the dungeon and is just like, "What's up? Let's fight." I don't know if it's nostalgia or what, but I really love this guy's design. He looks hilarious. His fight is mostly just him jumping around and shooting projectiles, but I'm starting to see a pattern. Once you beat him, his shield stays behind and tries to kill you as well, but it's not really much of a threat. I never really thought about it, but there really isn't much going on in this game, just kind of walking straight to the boss and fighting them, and moving on to the next one. Most of the time, it's me grinding enemies and trying to make the bosses easier. Once you beat Croc, you just move on straight forward into another spiral up to the next boss, which is a tree. Not a single puzzle, just a staircase going straight up. You get to fight the Desert Root. The Desert Root is an easy boss as long as you stay off to the sides. Most of his attacks are in the middle and bottom of the screen. He half-heartedly tries to pull you to the middle, but yeah, it's easy. He has a cool design though, which I've always liked. He has these like branch hands that come down and try to swipe at you, and he has a blast from his mouth that I never got hit by, but it looks like it would hurt. Once you finish him off, you heal up Camellia and you take off in your car, leaving Rudy behind. But you are off to the Village of Vampires, which is Camellia's hometown. I've always loved snowy towns and their aesthetics, and at this point, you get Camellia added to your party since Rudy is just too tired from running behind the car the whole time. This is the last town you get to explore in the game, and the last place that has a shop. At this point, you can buy the lightning hat, which is a must-have since the lightning hat is S tier and homes in on enemies. It's a great hat, trust me. Aside from that, you get a bit of lore about how this town recently became frozen over when the freezer took over the palace. One of the villagers said they tried to fly there by airship, but the blizzard was just too powerful. This chain of events sets you up to head off to the palace on foot. I really like this area, mostly because I love the snow and the mountains. There are these snow bunnies here that constantly respawn and attack you, making this one of the best grinding spots in the game for XP and money. Well, the XP becomes obsolete later on, but this is the best we've got so far. You never have to leave this screen. I just spent a lot of time here jumping around and hitting enemies, just because it was fun. Eventually, you're going to have to deal with these apes that can cause you a lot of grief if you're under-leveled for them. I just kind of grinded on the rabbits until I was able to whoop them. After getting past a bunch of them, you can save before going into the caves. The Land of Vampira Palace. This one might be one of my least favorite dungeony areas in the game, due to the fact that it's full of hazards that completely stop you from moving. One thing I really did like is that you get to fight the Freezer early on in his invincible state. It reminds me a bit of Tubba Blubba from Paper Mario. Eventually, he mocks you and just goes deeper inside of the palace, letting you live, for now. You see, the Freezer is completely invincible unless you have his weakness, which is chicken noodle soup, funny enough, but you have to find it, and I didn't like the way you had to find the soup. You have to fall down the right hole, it'll take you to the right part of the dungeon to find the soup. And if you go down the other one, you'll end up having to fight the Freezer, who is actually invincible and undamageable, which means you pretty much have to die and try again. You learn about the soup, but you don't really know where it is or anything, because there's like a bowl of soup down here, like a big pot. But I didn't actually remember that, so I went back to the town to see if I could figure it out, and nope, not at the town, so I had to go all the way back up, and eventually I did find the soup. While you're in front of the big pot, you can actually stock up on the soup, but don't do it. It's completely pointless and doesn't do you any good. After you use the chicken noodle soup and he screams about you knowing his weakness somehow, you beat him and you go back to the town, which has a really nice new color palette now that the snow has melted. It's bright and green, and it's cool to see your effect on the world by defeating the Freezer. One thing of note is this is your last chance to stock up on supplies. For real, if you get to this point, stock up here or suffer. The group gets the idea that they can use the airship that was mentioned before to go to Von Hessler's castle, so that is exactly what they do now that the snowstorm is gone. Once you're ready, you jump on the ship and you head off towards Von Hessler's castle. Well, that's the idea, because you end up crashing in a place called the Forest of Mazes. When you first crash land in the forest, you find out that Camellia hurt her ankle, so she can't come with you, so it's just you and Rudy versus the Forest of Mazes. This area haunted my childhood. Though it's incredibly simple, the creepy bad path taken sound effect has always existed in the back of my subconscious, probably forever. I remember being here for a long time. As an adult revisiting this game, I can really see how simple it is, but that has been true of the entire game to this point. It's funny how much my imagination played into my perception of this game, thinking the world was so much bigger than it was, but I think I just kind of imagined the places that I couldn't see. If you know the path, this area is really small. It requires trial and error. Camellia gives you a hint on how to find your way through the forest, and it is to listen to the sounds as you go through the doors. Meaning there is no indication prior to going through the path to know if you went the right way. This place reminds me a lot of the Lost Woods from Zelda, but it's a bit worse since there is no way to know which way to go. However, you can just get it down on paper and follow a map. It's not too long if you don't trial and error on top of forgetting where to go. If you just write it down, you'll be done in no time. Between the first and second half of the forest, you end up finding this creepy Quiznos rat looking creature named Murray, who is the last line of defense to the castle. His fight isn't too hard, and I like his wacky design. He just looks insane. I just want to give props to whoever designed the characters in this game. One thing I've noticed with this game is it's a good strategy just to stay off to the side. A lot of this enemy's attacks just go straight down, and some of them just will never hit you. Upon defeating him, he tries to take you with him by spawning a bunch of bomb orbs. After going through a little bit more of the maze, you arrive at Castle Von Hessler, where you're greeted by the nice NPC that told you about the Freezer's weakness earlier in the game. However, very obviously so, it is the woman known as Hydra, the leader of Von Hessler's army. Hydra fights a lot like her daughter Felina, and she even has a very similar weapon. Funny enough, she does not seem to care that you killed her daughter, and she never mentions it really. She kind of mentions a little bit, but barely. Like, she doesn't really care, it's more like you got in her way. Halfway through the battle, she summons the power of Mandra. Once you beat her again, she goes down for good. But now it's time for the biggest and most elaborate of the dungeons, Von Hessler's castle. At least that's what I wanted to say. After you beat Hydra, there's 2 screens and a straight line that connects directly to Von Hessler's throne room, and I'm not kidding. The last 3 bosses are almost back to back, just a few screens away from each other, like they're really trying to wrap this up. The Von Hessler fight is pretty standard practice. He floats around, shoots and does other attacks, and I just spammed cards at him and wailed on him until he was defeated. When you beat him, he does have a second form which is more demonic, thanks to the power of Owasso, a demon that has been possessing him. So in fact, Von Hessler isn't evil. It is this ghost creature named Owasso. It's basically the same fight again. Once you've defeated Von Hessler the second time, Owasso escapes from his body, and there's this neat chase scene where Owasso's going after Camellia to try to possess her, but it doesn't actually work. Funny enough, you don't make it in time, but Camellia just beats him up. And that's it. That's the end of Spike McFang. Everything's back to normal now. And here are my final thoughts. Even after replaying the game, I still quite like it, and you know, it seems like it tried to do what it wanted to do, and it has some flaws, but it's oozing with charm to make up for it. I think this game would have really benefited from having a sequel that was a little bit more fleshed out. There's a lot of potential here. Having a bunch of different hats and capes could have been a cool addition, and having different reasons to use different gear for different enemies or situations could have been awesome. I think it also would have been cool if the companions were a bit more versatile and let you kind of swap them in and out and have them do different things that were, you know, noticeable and impactful. There's a lot of what ifs and what could be's, and that's probably for the best because it was a good game. It didn't overstay its welcome. You could beat this game in under 6 hours. It's just really a shame that the series ended here and we didn't get to make a jump into 3D for the Nintendo 64. I think it could have really made a great 3D adventure platformer game. All in all, this is one of my favorite games from my childhood, and I'm happy to play through it again as an adult, even if it isn't the masterpiece I remember. I hope everyone enjoyed this video about Spike McFang, and yeah, I'll see you next time.